Hello, everyone. I am going to do this little video on how to do the essay template for Of Mice and Men. So let me get right to sharing my screen with you. And hey, here I am in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, anyway, start on your home page and you're going to scroll down to the bottom of the module and you're going to open up OMM Argumentative Essay Template. All right, I already have mine open, so we'll go right to that. Okay, so before we get into how to construct each section of it, I want to give you an overview on how we're going to construct the essay. Okay, so first off, it says we're going to use the template to develop our argumentative essay. Now, an argumentative essay is an essay where you defend a position. So academic arguments are not like regular arguments. Regular arguments are just like a verbal fight. But in an academic argument, you're going to present a claim, and then you're going to defend your claim. All right, so let's look at the prompt. Throughout Of Mice and Men, George shows evidence of being both a good friend and a bad friend to Lenny. Write an argumentative essay in which you discuss your opinion on whether overall you think George is either a good friend or a bad friend. Okay, so in an argumentative essay, you have to choose a side. You can't be neutral. You can't be like completely in the middle. You have to at least shade one side or the other. There also has to be two defensible sides for it to be an argumentative essay. In other words, there has to be legitimate reasons that show George is a good friend and legitimate reasons that show that he's a bad friend. And then you argue for why you're choosing one over the other. So that's an argumentative essay. Now, this is going to be a shaved down essay. We're not going to do a fully blown introduction and all that. We'll save that for semester 2. I want to focus on the most important parts. All right, so the most important sentence in the whole essay is the thesis statement. I actually have a video here. This blue link is a video link that will give you more information about writing a thesis statement. Over here on the body paragraphs, I have 3 links. This first link is about writing a body paragraph. And then I have 2 links over here, 2 different videos that talk about how to write a topic sentence. So if you're interested in using those, looking at them, I think the longest ones are about 5 minutes and the shortest ones are in the 2 to 3 minute range. So it won't take you very much time to look through those. Okay, and then we have our conclusion down here as well. I don't have a conclusion video link because the types of conclusions that they recommend writing don't really apply to this particular one, this particular essay. Okay, so in the overall construction of the essay, we're going to start with writing a thesis statement. And the thesis statement is going to show which side of the issue you believe, whether you believe George is overall a good friend or overall a bad friend. Okay, and then we're going to have 2 body paragraphs. And I'll get into the construction of those in a minute, but one body paragraph is going to be why George is a good friend. The other body paragraph is going to be why George is a bad friend. And then when we get to the conclusion, all right, you'll restate the thesis statement. I'll talk about that in a little while. But then your conclusion is you're going to explain why the good outweighs the bad, or why the bad outweighs the good. So our conclusion is not just going to be a summary of the essay. Our conclusion is where you actually write your opinion on why you think the good outweighs the bad, or the bad outweighs the good. So that's the overall construction of it. Okay, so let's get started with the thesis statement. And guys, since this is really our first essay experience, I'm going to give you a lot of stuff on this. You're not required to use the sentences that I have here, but I think it's a good idea if you do. If you don't use my sentences, just make sure the ones that you have are equally good, okay? All right, so with an argumentative essay, or any essay, any thesis statement, the first thing that is important is that your sentence is clear. Clarity is the whole point of human communication, whether it's verbal or written. I have an idea in my head. I want to get it out to you. I want you to understand clearly what it is that I'm trying to communicate. So that's always the most important thing, is clarity. Okay, then you also have to state your position very strongly. Okay, we don't want any weak thesis statements. We don't want any like, well, I'm kind of in the middle. I can't decide if he's good or bad. He's a little bit of both. You can't do that. You have to pick a side and you have to communicate it strongly. And then you have to write it perfectly. Now, the reason why I say perfect, because I normally say strive for excellence, not perfection, but the thesis statement is so important that you can't have any errors in it at all. In other words, it has to be a complete sentence. It has to be punctuated correctly. All the capitalization, all that stuff needs to be just right. Okay, so that's your goal. All right, so let's have a look. I gave a couple of samples, all right? So let's look at the first one here. Okay, so this one says, although George shows some qualities of being a bad friend, overall, he demonstrates throughout the novel that he is a good friend to Lenny. All right, so this is the good friend side. Okay, now let me mention a couple of things. These are some stylistic grammar issues that some of you might really appreciate. Okay, what we have in this first clause right here, this is what's called a subordinate clause. This cannot stand alone all by itself as a complete sentence. And so this is where we mention that George is sometimes a bad friend in the subordinate clause, in the lesser important clause. Then when we get to the main clause, this is the more important clause, we give our position. He demonstrates throughout the novel that he is a good friend to Lenny. So when we are acknowledging the other side, the side we don't agree with, we put that in the subordinate clause, in the lesser important clause. And then when we're promoting the side that we actually believe in, that's when we use the main clause, the more important clause. Okay, so notice the punctuation. Although George shows some qualities of being a bad friend, comma, overall, comma, he demonstrates throughout the novel that he is a good friend to Lenny. Okay, now, if you are on the side of thinking that George is overall a bad friend, then you just do the same wording, but you just reverse it. You say, although George shows some qualities of being a good friend, comma, overall, comma, he demonstrates throughout the novel that he is a bad friend to Lenny. Okay, so I don't care which side you pick. Both sides are defensible. It really is up to you to decide based on your own experience, your own values, your own thoughts on whether or not you think overall he is a good friend or a bad friend. Now, keep in mind, you are only going to choose one of these thesis statements. You are not going to do both. If you do both, it will not make any sense. You'll be contradicting yourself. So you just choose one. Okay, now the thesis statement is what they call the controlling sentence for the entire essay. Everything you write has to go back to support, promote, prove the thesis statement. So it really does control what you write throughout the rest of the time. Okay, and like I said, please look at the video on thesis statement. I think it was done pretty well. And it's not me, somebody else. Okay, now once we have the thesis statement in the introductory paragraph, and again, we're only going to write that one sentence for the intro. Now we're going to move on to the body paragraphs. Now the body paragraphs all start with a topic sentence, and the topic sentence basically tells what the whole rest of the paragraph is going to be about. Okay, now just for our purposes of demonstration, I'm going to choose this position. I'm going to choose the position that George overall is a good friend. Okay, so now what I want to do is have supporting evidence for, I want to have a topic sentence that tells what this paragraph is going to be about. And this is going to be the paragraph about George being a good friend. So here's what you could use as a topic sentence. George demonstrates that he is a good friend because he cared for Lenny. Now, this is an important part, cared for. Cared for is a very general term. There's no specific detail on what it means to care for Lenny. It's kind of a general statement. And that's really what you want to do in your topic sentence. You want to give a more general statement. Because then when you're going to put in the evidence and the explanation is you're going to put specific examples that show how he cared for Lenny. All right. So the place where you go to get your evidence is the good friend, bad friend assignment we did. Remember all those chapters we did, quotes on how George is a good friend? All right, you're going to go back and look at that, and you probably already have the best supporting evidence to show how he cared for Lenny. So you need to go back through your paper that you did, look at all the evidence you have for the good friend side, and pick the two best pieces of evidence that show how George cared for Lenny. Okay, then you're going to come back to here, and you're going to paste it into the evidence. Evidence 1 is where you paste that quote. So just for example, this is the only one I did for demonstration in class. So I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it into the piece of evidence here. And there it is. And then what you do here is you're going to explain how this evidence supports that statement. It's kind of like doing an ACE paragraph. You're going to give your explanation on how whatever you wrote here in the evidence, you're going to give your explanation on how that shows that George is a good friend because he cares for Lenny. Then after you do that, you go add a second piece of evidence. So you go back to your George is a good friend, bad friend assignment, pick another piece of evidence, and then you do the same thing. Okay, now when you get to the next body paragraph, this is where you still have to acknowledge the other side, okay? Because it just would not be academically correct if you didn't at least acknowledge the other side. So our other topic sentence is going to look like this. Even though George shows qualities of being a good friend, he also demonstrates that he can be a bad friend as well. Okay, so when I do this first part, even though George shows qualities of being a good friend, this statement really acts as a transition statement from the previous paragraph. So you do that little clause. Again, that's another subordinate, lesser important clause, but it acts as a transition. And then you give the main clause. He also demonstrates that he can be a bad friend as well. And so then you're going to go back to your good friend, bad friend assignment. You're going to go down to the bottom, and you're going to find the best examples that show that George can also at sometimes be a bad friend. Choose those examples, and you put it in the evidence box, and then you give your explanation. And then you go for a second piece of evidence, and then a second explanation. Okay, so that's how you will do the body paragraphs. Now, these body paragraphs will still not be fully in essay form, because when you write it out in your paragraphs, you still have to set up your quotes. You have to provide a little context for the quotes. You still have to blend things together to make it all sound like it's one paragraph that flows well together, not just individual blocks that are squished together. But once you've got all the main things in place, you'll be able to go back and do that. Okay, finally, we get to the conclusion. And the first part here is to restate the thesis statement. You don't want to repeat the thesis statement word for word. You don't want to just copy and paste it down there, because, somebody will look at that and say, well, that's just the same sentence. I've already read that. So you want to restate it. And so really, you're just going to communicate the same ideas, but in different words, maybe different sentence structure. Maybe you change a few keywords, something like that. Okay. Maybe you reverse the clauses. Maybe you say something that, George shows that he's a good friend, even though he occasionally, does negative things, something like that. You're going to restate the thesis statement. So communicate the same ideas, just maybe change the sentence structure a little bit, change a few keywords. Okay, and then over here, you're going to explain why the good outweighs the bad or the bad outweighs the good. This is where you're saying why one of these sides is more important than the other. And this is going to be several sentences. This is not just a summary of your argument. This is where you actually do some analysis. And this is where, you know, your values, your experience, your voice as a writer really comes through, because you're basically explaining why you think one of these positions is, you know, more important than the other, why him being a good friend is a stronger idea than being a bad friend, or conversely, why he is a bad friend more than why the bad friend outweighs the good that he does. So that's what you need to do in the conclusion. Okay, I hope that this really helps. We will cover this in class, but in case you need a little help on the side, please come back and look at this video. All right, I wish you guys all the very best on this.